So we're going to go on ahead and get started, and folks, I'm sure will continue to join as we get going. But I just want to first start by saying thank you so much for joining us today for Empower Hour. We're really excited that you can be here. This event is being brought to you by the Ohio University Alumni Association, where our goal really is to engage you, our alumni and our supporters. We need you to stay involved with Ohio University so we can keep offering new and amazing experiences to current and future Bobcats. And so I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you for supporting Ohio. And so my name is Caleb Biesecker. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Experiences. I'm going to be your host for the event today, and I want to walk through a few housekeeping items before we get going. And so first, I just want to make everyone aware your cameras and microphones are turned off. And so we encourage you to be active in the chat. That is where you can engage with other participants and have any maybe like tech questions put there. But before you do that, make sure you change where it says to who you're sending the message to. Change it to all panelists and attendees so other attendees can see what you're saying as well. So make sure that you change that. If you do have questions that you want our presenters to answer, why don't you go ahead and use the Q&A function that's there at the bottom. Put your questions in there, and then we'll try and address all of those at the end of the presentation. So as you have questions throughout, be sure to put them in the Q&A function. I also want to let you know this presentation is being recorded, so it's going to be available afterwards. You can share it with your friends. It usually takes a week or two to get put up on the website, but it'll be there for you to watch again or share with anyone. And so that's great. And then lastly, I wanted to let you know that you do have the opportunity to get 20% off in the Bobcat store by using the code EMPOWER519. And so that expires on May 26th. I'll put that in the chat for you all. But an opportunity for 20% off your Bobcat swag that I know everybody needs. And so again, thank you all for being here. I know that was a lot of announcements. If you have questions, be sure to put them in the chat. If you have questions for our panelists, put them in the Q&A function. Again, thanks so much for being here. And I'm going to turn things over to our presenters for the day.
Hey, Caleb, thank you. A big thank you to you and to the Ohio University Alumni Association for hosting me and Shelley. And for those of you who know me and Shelley, you know we are longtime friends and Ohio University alums. And I know, Shelley, if you want to say what decade it was that we were students at Ohio University, but
well, it was in the early 70s, 1970s.
I can't believe
and we were roommates down at Crawford Hall, which was new down on the South Green at that time.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and we were also roommates at Crawford, and it was controversial at the time. We were on a black floor section, and then later we were roommates at Bromley, uptown at Bromley Hall. So I mean, this is really taking us back to long time ago. And we were friends before that. I mean, even before we went to college.
Yeah.
Friends in high school.
Even in high school, we were friends. We walked together. We were at Shaker Heights High School, and we walked to school. Our families were friends.
So, and you know, bringing us back to why we're all here. Shelley and I have been writing for a long time. We were writing while we were at school, while we were roommates. I worked for a couple of the campus newspapers and did some commentaries for WOUB radio, the campus radio station. I think Shelley did the same thing. But
sure did. It was really a lot of fun.
It was fun and crazy. And there's some stuff that we can't even talk about right now because you know what that era was all about. Anyway, you guys are here because you want to be writers. You want to be a writer or you're already writing. So before we get started, we want to find out a little bit about who you are. So we're going to take a poll.
All right, the questions will be on the screen and you can respond in the chat. And the questions are, how many of you are already writers? How many of you have written articles or family histories or even books? How many of you have not written anything before yet? Just please share your answers in the chat and we'll give you a few seconds for that.
Wow.
Wow.
Looks like people have written something. Everybody's written.
It's wonderful.
And the people have written articles at least. And
it's that OU education, I guess.
but everybody's didn't go to OU, so.
Okay.
already. I guess this hasn't changed a whole lot. Shall we be done? Because it looks like it's pretty clear. 87% of folks out there have already written something.
Yeah.
A few of them have done what we've done, 9% written family histories. And then some people wrote, 9% have actually written books. Ooh, I'd be curious to know who those folks are. That makes me nervous. Okay, I guess we're kind of done with the polling. Now that we know something about you, Shelley and I are going to share some experiences with you that will hopefully help you if you are on the road to publishing something. We're going to just tell you a little bit about what we've learned. I have been writing most of my life. I started in college. I went to Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism to learn some more about writing. And then my whole career, 41 years or so as a broadcast journalist, I worked for United Press International and a radio station, WHDH, both those in Boston. I anchored for the ABC radio network. I worked for WCBS TV as a writer producer. I covered the Reagan White House for NBC News. I worked for an all news radio station in Washington, D.C. And the last about 20 years of my career, I worked for a TV station in Washington, D.C., WTTG TV. So it's not like writing a book. That's what I found out. I mean, writing a book came later after I retired, and I retired 7 years ago, whatever. I have a book trailer that will show you that it will explain to you why I thought I had a personal family history that was important to talk about. So let's take a look at that video. Oops, we don't have any audio. Barbara. It's kind of like the magic of television. We were always dancing around going, hey, the video's not there. And I remember a guy, let's try this again. No. There we go.
I was born in a hospital for colored people. It was in the Deep South during a time when my people were victims of racial hatred, intimidated, humiliated, oppressed. My father and uncle had a low tolerance for being mistreated. Dad waged a very public battle against white police brutality, and his younger brother Fred fought segregated buses all the way to the Supreme Court.
I made a personal secret commitment. Finish law school, come back to Alabama, take the bar exam, become a lawyer, and destroy everything segregated I could find. I did know Mrs. Parks was asked to get up to give her seat, that refused to go up her seat, and then politely let them arrest her.
The Montgomery Bus Boycott was a seminal moment in our nation's history. It actually jump-started the civil rights movement. The world was watching. In my book, you'll discover names you never heard before. Little-known stories about instigators who worked behind the scenes to change the racial climate of America. I was only 4 years old when the boycott began, but even at that young age, I sensed the injustice of segregation. Separate waiting rooms, white water fountains, restaurants for white people only. This is personal. I am proud of my father and my uncle for the major role they played in shutting down Jim Crow. This book is a tribute to them for helping to open doors of opportunity for me and countless others.
Well, enough about me. Like me, Shelley had a very, very powerful, and she knew it, a very powerful family history that she wanted to tell. And she got started writing. Well, she knew early on that she wanted to write, right, Jill?
That's right. I fell in love with literature and poetry as a child. My parents were writers. My father recited, wrote, recorded, and published poetry. Our mother read poetry to us. My parents even named me after the poet Percy Shelley. Then at the age of 8, I became interested in family history, and I was heavily influenced by people like my paternal grandmother and my father and uncle. We have some photos I'd like to share with you. This is a photo of my paternal grandparents, Louise and Charles Stokes. They married in Cleveland in 1928. However, 4.5 years later, Charles died at 28 years old, leaving my grandmother a widow when their sons were 3 and 1. Here is a picture of my father and my uncle at the US Capitol. In 1967, my uncle Carl Stokes became the first Black mayor of a major American city, Cleveland. On the 40th anniversary of his election, the Cleveland Plain Dealer reported, the grandson of a slave defeated the grandson of a president. It had never happened before, and it's never happened since. Carl had defeated Seth Taft, the grandson of William Howard Taft. I want to show you another photo of my grandmother who would have thought that things would have turned out as they did, given the circumstances in their youth. But other than my grandmother, no one was prouder of my uncle's achievements than his big brother, my father, Louis Stokes. And the affection the brothers had for each other was mutual. Although Carl had initially set his sights on going to Congress, he decided he liked being mayor, and he endorsed my father to run after the Supreme Court ordered Ohio to redraw the lines of a gerrymandered district. And that's how he became the first Black congressman from Ohio. I wanted to learn more about where our family came from. My grandmother, Louise Stokes, told me to go back to Rennes, Georgia, where she and her 10 other siblings had been born and raised. I traced their lineage from slavery to civil rights, all the way from Rennes, Georgia. And I was fascinated to see up close slave quarters where my ancestors lived, and the slave market where members of my family were bought and sold, and our families were separated. There were people outside the family who later encouraged me to write my story.
And I think Shelley and I share why we wanted to tell our family stories. I mean, it's a thank you, a kind of a tribute. Why I wanted to write my book was it was a tribute to my father and my uncle and all those foot soldiers and unsung heroes and heroines involved in the Montgomery Bus Boycott, who basically opened doors of opportunity for us. And so that's kind of a mutual reason we both wanted to share stories about our family. So this might be a good place for us to take our second poll. So just out of curiosity, we want to know what you guys who are working on something are working on. What are you working on? Are you working on fiction? Are you working on nonfiction? Are you working on poetry or memoir? And again, we want you to share your answers in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds to finish that. Okay, the polling is interesting. Shelley and I are doing memoir, and for a period of time, there was a lot of memoir going on. I see 24% of you guys are doing memoir, but there's a split between fiction and nonfiction, 48% to 48%. And poetry, which I think is just really difficult. You brave souls out there, that 10% of you guys, you go. So I would just say that most of the writing that I've been doing, throughout my career and right now, with this book has been nonfiction. And one of the things that prompted me to write was the fact that my father was writing about the Montgomery bus boycott. And he waited until, I mean, he'd been a lawyer for most of his career, and then he became a judge and moved back from Cleveland to Montgomery, Alabama. And he started, well, he had an appointment that was a life appointment, but my mother was dealing with Alzheimer's. And so he decided to retire and care for my mother and to write this story. And, you know, there are a gazillion narratives out of that bus boycott about what happened. And he wanted to write his story, but he didn't finish it. I mean, my brother, Tom Jr., decided we should talk to him about, you know, what had happened during the boycott, and we recorded his oral history, but he didn't get to finish his book. He wrote a few chapters, and his younger brother, Fred, who was the attorney for the boycott, had written his own book, Bus Ride to Justice. But when Dad died, it was as if he had thrown down the gauntlet and I had to pick it up. So I knew that I had to write my story. So how do you know what it is that you want to write? I don't know. I'm gonna let Shelley tell you about the path she decided she had to write.
Well, I had big dreams, but I got stuck doing technical writing for a major corporation, AT&T and the Bell System, for many years. They were hiring African Americans as a result of a consent decree for a century of discrimination against women and minorities. And upon graduating from Ohio U, opportunities opened for us. And I loved writing so much that I enjoyed it, but it wasn't really where my heart lay. So, but I always found a way to find ways of doing things that I love to do with writing, along with my different other tasks. But I was also inspired by an Ohio University history professor, Marvin Fletcher. He really introduced me to African American history, and it was a time during the early 1970s when Black students were protesting to get Black studies courses on campus with more Black professors. And here was a white professor who fought to get a Black history course in the regular university curriculum.
Well, who knew that that would happen? I mean, just to throw this in, I took that class with Shelley. I just wasn't as inspired as Shelley was by that professor to write. It took me a lot of years later to decide that I wanted to write about African American history, but go ahead, Shelley.
And it took me a while also, but I took several courses at Georgetown University, a program on writing, editing, and publications. One of the professors there suggested when you're staring at that blank page and you're not sure how to get started, just writing down some words as a prompt. And before you know it, you'll have a paragraph and you'll fill that page and be able to proceed. I also pursued a master's in historic preservation at Goucher College outside of Baltimore. I wanted to learn more about architecture and history to preserve and write about the places of the African American experience. The founder and director of that program, Richard Wagner, along with other professors, embraced and supported my dreams, including working one-on-one with a Pulitzer Prize investigative reporter who also worked in the Masters of Fine Arts program there. And I found that really inspiring. I did a ton of writing for him for an entire semester. And then by the end, he suggested that memoir was the way to go. And someone else who's been very helpful to me is also an Ohio University graduate, a woman by the name of Carolyn Means Milter. I babysat for her while growing up in the Ludlow neighborhood of Shaker Heights, where Karen and I grew up. But when she left OU, she worked for the Cleveland Press. She was also one of the leaders that helped make things work in that community. So no matter what stage you're at with your project or whatever your genre is, it may be a good idea to get into a class. Karen encouraged me to get involved with a phenomenal writing workshop where we worked with some very special writers. And for me, it was Ralph Eubanks, but Karen's got a lot more to tell you about that.
It was great. We took that class together, but I had actually taken some classes before that with Will Haygood. I don't know if you are aware, if you saw the movie, The Butler, Will Haygood wrote that book. But the Hurston Wright Foundation was the organization that sponsored this writing workshop. And it was founded by a woman, Marita Golden, who was who actually was in the class with me at Columbia University at the Graduate School of Journalism. I knew back then that she was going to be amazing, but she is a prolific author who has written something like 17 books, fiction, nonfiction, poetry. And she decided she wanted to set up this organization that would help emerging African-American writers to get started writing. And so I learned a lot from other authors. You met agents. I mean, it was just a really good grounding to get started. So I would suggest that if you have an opportunity to take a writing workshop, you should do that. My first writing workshop was with a woman, Patrice Gaines, who used to be a reporter for the Washington Post, wrote a book called Laughing in the Dark. And we did it was just it was supposed to be a Skype session with some other writers, and there were just three of us, three women. And we decided that on a Saturday when we were meeting that in the morning, we didn't want to get up and put on makeup and take our pajamas off. So we did, our classwork was done on the phone, but we shared each other's chapters. And, the professor gave us some instruction and we critiqued each other's works. So that was always really good. It was helpful to take those classes to get motivated. But I did find, even though I was doing that, I still found I struggled to find time to write. So how do you find the time to write? When I started working on my book, it was in 2014. I retired that spring. And by then, my dad had died. I'd interviewed him. My first husband had passed away. So I was in my house in Silver Spring, Maryland by myself. I had the house to myself. I had time to myself, and you would think that I could just sort of sit down and I didn't have a job. I wasn't working, but I just had to find the time to write. And so it's different for different people. Different people figure it out however they do. And Shelley and I had different experiences.
Yes, well, I spent many years trying to juggle work and family. I have 3 sons, Brett, Eric, and Grant. And so I would write in the stands during their athletic games or practices, or when they went to bed, or during my lunch hour at work. I studied children's literature as I read to them. Then I would take vacation time to attend different writing workshops for writing for children. And still, I continue to find a way to dovetail my work assignments with some personal jobs. I had left the Bell system and had gone on to Howard University, where I had a chance to do a little more writing closer to my dreams. But for going to grad school, I waited till my children were much older. So it's been a long journey. When I'm dealing with writer's block, what I find is helpful for me is to read other writers and books about the craft of writing. And some of my favorite, I think my favorite book about writing is by William Zinsser.
That's a good one. I think that everybody puts that at the top of the list when you take those writing workshops. For me, deadlines for my broadcast career were very helpful because I kind of felt like, I was used to jumping a live truck, going out interviewing people, and you had to step in front of the camera and be ready. And so you had to have your script already written. So I thought it wasn't going to be a problem for me, but writing a book is not the same as doing TV news. And I did find also that I needed to carve out a special time to do the writing, because here's what I found, after I retired, I'd get up in the morning and I go, think I want to run down to Starbucks, get a cup of coffee, read the newspaper. And I wasn't really ready to write until about, for me, 11 o'clock in the morning was good. And I would start writing, but I still sometimes would sit there and stare at the computer going, where am I and what am I going to do? So I learned some tips from those workshops we're talking about. And one of them was, why don't you just get yourself a little egg timer? Those little, timers, they time about what, 10 minutes or something. Stick it on your desk or wherever you're writing. And I would set it for 3 minutes. And I found that once if I could blow past the 3 minutes, I could keep on going. And, early on it was, well, I'll do 3 minutes and then I'll do an hour. I'll do 3 minutes and I'll do 2 hours. And it got to the point where I would do some time writing. I'd take a little lunch break. And sometimes I would look up and it would be 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So, you know, that was just like a prompt that helped me. And another thing was just some really good advice I got from my friend, Will Haygood. And he used to just tell people, keep your butt in the seat. You know, just don't get up, just sit there and, you know, maybe something will come to you. So enough about the writing tips. We should talk a little bit about research, because even if you're writing poetry or fiction, you still need to do some research about the period and the time. And, you know, it's a real cornerstone of nonfiction. But I found it to be a lot of fun. And you have to, you know, as you're writing your chapters, this is what I used to do, put a little board on the wall and I'd write some outlines of my chapters and put a little sticky pin and pin it in the wall. Those are some little tips. And you'll find that with the research part, you're going to be doing that even after your manuscript is finished and it's in the hands of your publisher. I couldn't stop it. I was researching up until the time almost the book came out.
Well, I developed an interest in research in the 5th grade at Ludlow Elementary School in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And I know there's some friends of ours that are listening in on this, and I'm sure they can remember all of the research we were required to do, a lot of reports, and we had a phenomenal teacher. We were growing up in a community that was a national model of integration. In the 1950s, the mid-1950s, bombings and white flight was the typical response to Blacks moving into white suburban neighborhoods. But in the Ludlow neighborhood, the response was different, working mostly in their homes, backyards, schools, and more. Our parents, the whole community, people of Black, white, Asian, Jewish, Christian, all worked together to achieve the American dream of home ownership and a good education for everybody. With research, I learned to go right to the source. For the memoir I'm writing, I've taken several trips back to my grandmother's home place in Georgia, and I was deeply affected by the old slave quarters. I met people firsthand who were descendants of former slave owners. I went to churches that were white churches where some of our African-American ancestors sat in the balcony in the back of the churches. And then I was able to also see the Black churches that were formed immediately after the Civil War ended. The one-room schoolhouse that my grandmother grew up in impacted me, greatly, knowing that we had the opportunity to go to school at Ludlow.
The research is.
How about your research, Karen?
It's important. And Shelley, I moved to Montgomery at the beginning of my research. I mean, I retired in 2014 in the spring, and then I just drove down to Montgomery and moved into my grandmother's old house. And it was a few blocks away from Alabama State University. But while I was there, I joined some civic organizations where I could meet people. I mean, I didn't know where to start. I did start with my uncle, right? I mean, he was a lawyer for the boycott. So I interviewed him on camera. And then I joined this one particular group called One Montgomery. And I was introduced to this organization by some longtime friends of my parents, a white couple, Reverend Bob and Jeannie Gretz. They were active during the boycott. He was in the Montgomery Improvement Association, which coordinated the boycott. And he, because of his activism, their house was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan. So anyway, they were going to this civic organization and they introduced me. And I told everybody that I was working on this book, Daughter. I don't know if I had named it by then, Daughter of the Boycott. That's another long story. But names change. You'll find that out if you're writing a book. But I asked people if they could point me in a direction. Do you know anybody? What do you know about the bus boycott? And as soon as I sat down, it was a breakfast meeting. A woman at my table said, "Oh, you're going to want to talk to me." and her father was the racist police commissioner during the boycott. So this was an organization where people were very helpful to me. Somebody from the Alabama Department of the Archives was helpful. They would bring in community leaders to speak, and I met the executive editor of the newspaper, the Montgomery Advertiser newspaper. And so, I mean, I went to museums and I went to the archives, and, you know, the research can just go on and on and on. And I'll just say this one last thing about research. If you want to know anything about what's going on in a town, go to a barber shop. I went to a barber shop and met Martin Luther King's barber. So, I mean, you know, research is important, and it can help really add some flavor and color to whatever it is you're working on. But you guys are working on something, and I know most of you who have tuned in have really tuned in because you're interested in steps to publishing. So maybe Shelley can give you some advice.
Well, you know, we have an audience with a lot of talent out there and a lot of accomplishments, and it's really nice that you tuned in, and we're happy to be here with you. Thank you. And so maybe you don't start out writing a book. Maybe you try writing a web article or newspaper or magazine articles. One of the pieces that I'm especially proud of is on the website for the White House Historical Association. You'll see an image here about the article. It's basically about the first Black congressman who was elected in the North in 1928. His name was Oscar Stanton DePriest. At that time, Herbert Hoover was president. And there was a White House tradition for the wives of members of Congress to be invited to one big White House tea. But it was also a period of strict racial segregation. But the Hoovers were Quakers, and they didn't want the white wives of the congressman to exclude Mrs. DePriest. So instead of one big traditional tea for everyone, all of the wives, Lou Henry Hoover had several teas. And the last one was the smallest, for just about 12 persons, who she thought would be polite and accepting of Mrs. DePriest. Well, and the invitation was sent secretly. Everything was done really low key, not to upset at that time Southern Democrats. However, once the press got wind of the event, it became a national controversy. There were people that felt that there was nothing wrong with it and applauded it, but there were others who, much like today with some of the different issues we have going on, that felt just the opposite. And it caused as much of a stir as when President Theodore Roosevelt had invited Booker T. Washington for dinner at the White House in 1901.
Well, Shelley, I'm glad you brought up writing articles, because that really helped me along when I was working on Daughter of the Boycott. I went to that one Montgomery meeting when the editor of the Montgomery Advertiser was working there, and I introduced myself to him after the meeting, and we had lunch, and he invited me to write for a column, Alabama Voices. He says, "You're an Alabama native, you can contribute to a column in our paper." So for about a year, I wrote articles about a couple times a month for a year. And it was helpful to me to give me a foray into meeting other people in Alabama who didn't know me. You know, I wasn't a complete stranger because they could read what I was writing in the paper. And I was reading about other civil rights issues. You know, there was a spate of police brutality cases in 2014, 2015 around, well, they never stopped, but it was Michael Brown and Eric Garner and Freddie Brown back then. And I had something to say about that. I wrote about the opening of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC that was just opening up. So it was wonderful to have the opportunity to write about some articles, and it kind of gave me a little break from just writing about the book, but I think it is helpful. Lots of types of writing can lead you to a book.
Well, I'm also really thankful that my master's thesis, and I'll show you an image of that, it's called Recognizing Ludlow as a National Treasure. And I'm very, very happy that the Cleveland Restoration Society has used the thesis as a basis for recognizing Ludlow as part of the African American Civil Rights Trail in Cleveland, Ohio. It's the only such trail in the North. And I wrote the thesis as part of my preparation for the memoir I'm working on. It's really more like a dissertation than a thesis, but I was trying to really make a case for the journey of African Americans with respect to places, their homes, their churches, their schools, from slavery up to the civil rights era. And I also wanted very much to recognize our parents' generation for all the sacrifices they made and the courage they had to give us this incredible opportunity to grow up in the sort of world that Martin Luther King had often said that was what he dreamed of. We had that experience in elementary school and to a great extent throughout the entire community. So that's one thing I'm really, really thankful. And I just want to give a shout out to Megan Hayes, the Shaker librarian, who really helped to promote that. And then one other article that I'm especially excited about was for a National Preservation magazine. And it was an article called Ludlow's Color Field. And that was there's a sculpture that has been constructed in the Ludlow neighborhood. One is in the main Ludlow area, and another's in Moreland. And it's to recognize and honor the people who made the integration work there for 50 years.
I'm just excited that we are at a point in time where we are telling our stories and that they're starting to be appreciated. I mean, I can't tell you how excited I was to go into a major bookstore. I don't know if I should say the name of the bookstore. And I was in the DC area, and I was going to ask somebody if my book was being sold there. And they had it on a table in the front of the store with a whole lot of books about race and racism. And so, you know, there's finally an appetite for the kinds of stories about Black people that have been ignored over time. So as we sort of, and you know what I forgot to throw in when I was talking about research, the Library of Congress, hello, there's a lot of material in that place. And I went there when they had the Rosa Parks papers as a part of a collection, and it was available to researchers at the time. It has since been made available to everybody because they have this incredible exhibit now about Rosa Parks and who she was writing to and what she was writing about, and letters and cards to friends. And, you know, it just sort of helps to, as my book does, disentangle the myth of who Rosa Parks really was. Now, as we kind of wrap up, right, we're sort of winding this to a close, but we want to hear in a little bit from folks out there who have questions. But when you get back down to the matter of actually getting published, oh God, it's so painful. I can't tell you. I can tell you a little about my experience. Early on, I talked to a publisher who was interested in what I was working on. And I just started writing and thinking, well, you know, maybe I have somebody to publish my work. And then I also was in touch with a university press, because I was thinking I wasn't going to self-publish. You know, you have that option. A lot of people are self-publishing these days. I kind of felt like I was too lazy to go the self-publishing route because there's just too much stuff that you have to do. And I wanted to get a traditional publisher. Well, at some point along, it took me 5 years to write this book, okay? At some point along the way, the publisher I had been talking to was no longer interested, and the university press lost interest too. So I knew then that I had to find an agent if you want to do something, if you want to find your way to a traditional publisher. And I didn't know one. I didn't think I did, but so here's the advice. There's a publication. It's a, what's it called? Guide to Literary Agents. And each year it comes out. You can probably get one for the year 2020. I don't know if 2021 is out yet. Go on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. And you can look up, they have every agent in the country listed and what genre that they're looking for and what their submission guidelines are. Do they want you to submit a query letter to them, or do they want you to send a few chapters from your manuscript? But it's a way to start, and I'm going to just say good luck. I could tell you a whole long story about how painful it is to go along this journey to get published, but it can happen. And I'm wishing luck to everybody out there trying to do it. I did it, so I figure and this probably is a good place for us to stop and take a few questions.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much again, Shelley and Karen. I really appreciate you joining us, and I just love the excitement that you both bring when you talk about One Ohio University and the stories that you share. That's so fun to see. And then I just really appreciate you sharing your tips and experiences that have led you to the works that you've had published and have written. I just think it's been so good for me and, alumni to hear these stories and then hear your experience as well as they pursue potential careers or publishing opportunities. So I want to say thank you. And we will take a moment now and just, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I do have a couple of questions that I had written down that we can start with while people continue to put more questions in there. The first one that was asked was, Shelley, you had mentioned a specific book that was helpful for you. And I think, Karen, you reiterated a lot of these workshops mentioned this book that was helpful in writing. Could you just maybe mention specifically what that book was? And then maybe other resources that you've used as well that have been helpful.
Okay, sure. The book that I really enjoy the most is called Writing Well by William Zinsser. And he also, I think it's chapter 2 that he talks about memoir, if you're interested in writing for memoirs. But another one of his books that I enjoy reading is Writing About Places. And if you subscribe or if you're interested in using Audible, I love listening to him actually read the book to you. It's wonderful because he's got a lot of humor and it's just amazing. I can listen to it over and over again and I'm always learning something new. That's one of my favorite sources.
What I found was helpful to me when I was writing was to read other people's nonfiction. I mean, I just wanted to know how people approached the idea of working on what they were doing. And so I would read, I read Olivia Bundles has written about her great-great-grandmother, Madam C.J. Walker. I read a gazillion of Marita Golden's books. She had put together something about Us Against Alzheimer's and a book called The Wide Circumference of Love, where she was talking about an African-American couple who was dealing with Alzheimer's, which I could kind of relate to. And I mentioned in my book the fact that my mom had Alzheimer's, and I just wanted to see how other people were writing about it because it's such a personal thing. I read Will Haygood's books. He's got many. I just wanted to know how other people approached, and Will wrote The Haygoods of Columbus, memoir, how to write about your family. Because, you might make some people mad. I mean, it's hard to know how to approach it in a sensitive way, but you want to be honest. And so I read a lot of other people's books just to see how they approached writing personal stories.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think that's going to be helpful for folks out there. Another question that came in, and I know, Karen, in my time speaking with you, you've touched on this a little bit, and I'd be anxious to hear from both of you, though, what your experience is in marketing the book once published.
It's fun and exciting and crazy because my book was launched in a pandemic. And the reason that I have that trailer, thank you to a friend of mine who was a former TV producer who became a filmmaker, said, you're going to need to get some attention to your book because what happened, and I'm going to even say this, I asked my publisher not to put my book out in May because we were at the height of the pandemic. The libraries were closed, the bookstores were closed, schools were closed. Everybody, I had a big event lined up right before the book came out to a conference, judicial conference of lawyers and judges in New Jersey. And first they postponed it, then they canceled it. They were, I had there were TV interviews and things. They just all got canceled. So I didn't know what to do. And he said, we're going to put together a trailer that tells your story. And it needs to be something that's kind of compelling to get people's attention. So that was the one thing that really helped me. And then I was in TV news for a long time. So I have people I can reach out to. And I could probably help somebody else. I could be somebody's publicist. So I set up interviews with radio and TV stations, in the Washington, D.C. area. But my publishing company also had a publicist and a marketing coordinator who were also helpful. They asked a lot of questions about who you know and how to set you up. And so I had interviews with radio stations in California. And I actually had an interview with Shelley's brother, Chuck Stokes, who he hosts a TV show at a station in Detroit. So, the marketing is difficult, but I think I had a leg up because I do know a lot of people in the media industry. And then, there's book clubs, there were churches. A friend of mine who's an author said, once your book gets out there, you're going to be like a shoe salesman trying to get your books bought. So it is kind of like that.
Shelley, I didn't know if you had any experiences that you wanted to add with any of your works.
Well, I think I can say that I got a lot of help from persons affiliated with my graduate school. They really were 100% behind me, and it took me 6 years to get my master's while juggling family. But all throughout that period, and even now, they are still in my corner. That was how I had the opportunity to write for the National Preservation magazine. One of my professors just said, you ought to write an article. And so I just wrote one, submitted it, but I really didn't even know that the magazine existed. He made me aware of that. And the same thing happened with the White House Historical Association. One of my professors was also a vice president for the association. And I had done a project in school, and he really loved the idea of publishing something about it one day. And he said, if I ever get some funding, I'm going to let you know, we're going to do this. And he got the funding and we did it. Bill Bouchon was his name. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. So I really think that, when Karen talked about taking classes, you're going to meet people that care and find your subject interesting, and it will help you. I found the same thing true by attending the Hurston Wright Foundation. The teacher that for the class Karen and I had, he just made a really big difference in my prologue, and then told me, when you're ready, I've got, a university press that I think will be interested. And I also reached out to, because my subject was dealing with Cleveland, I reached out to the Western Reserve Historical Society. And those people there are also willing to be helpful.
Oh yeah, got to use your network and resources there.
Exactly.
I bet that is amazing, as some of those like conferences or book writing things that have helped you in your time. I bet you meet a lot of interesting people there, to your point, that probably are willing to help and want to see each other succeed. And so that's great.
That's true.
Advice. Another question that came in kind of about this, just the entire process overall, but specifically asking about the editing process, decisions on what stays, what goes, and what that process was like for both of you.
Well, I'll jump right in here. The editing started from, if you're writing nonfiction, you have to write a book proposal to attract, to farm around to the potential publishers to see if they really are interested in your book. And they want to know how your book is going to be, how you're going to market your book, blah, 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 blah. But once the manuscript gets to the editor, so my agent actually helped me do some editing of the book proposal before it went to the publisher. And then once it got to the publisher, they had their own editors. The acquisitions editor had a look at it. And, first it's like, okay, I've written a 300-page book, and they're like, that's too long. You got to kill some of your babies, right? Some of the stories that you really loved are going to disappear. And so you have to kind of take a deep breath and go, what's most important to me? What's the story that I really want to get across? But if there's something in there that you want to fight for, you got to fight for it. And so there was that round of editing. And then there was another round of editing with somebody who did a lot of the grammatical issues and blah, 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 blah. And they also want to make sure that there are, there's a lot of fact checking that goes on to make sure that your facts are straight. So I think there were 3 different editors, but there wasn't a lot of big structural editing. They really were happy with the book. They liked the book, they liked the story. There were just too many narratives in the story, and some of them had to go. So, I mean, I was really happy to get the main story out. And there are stories in there that can be told in the future.
Yeah, Shelley, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add?
Not really, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's great. So we've got one more question that I see right in front of me. And so if you're in the audience and you have more questions, we do have about 5 minutes left. So be sure to put those in the Q&A. But the question that I see in front of me is someone was asking about, I guess, the process of being published, how you selected a publisher, advice that goes into that. And then if you'd be willing to mention who your publisher was. I think they specifically mentioned you, Karen, but definitely you as well, Shelley, if you have something that you'd want to mention as well with that. So.
Okay, thank you.
My publisher's Lawrence Hill Books. It's an imprint of Chicago Review Press. So it's an independent publisher out of Chicago. And I got to them through my agent. I mean, that's why you get an agent, because there's a gazillion publishers out there. You can approach some publishers who will accept unsolicited manuscripts, but you've got to find them. And they will tell you what they're looking for. They might just want, a synopsis of your bio and 3 sample chapters, or they might want that whole book proposal. And look up how to put a book proposal together. They want the bio. They want how you're going to market the book. They want you to take a look at what's in the library or the bookstore around what category your book would fit in, where on the shelf your book would be. And they want you to compare, they want you to do a comparative analysis between your book and some other books to see if there's a place for yours. And you're kind of saying, well, my book will be better than that because, or whatever. So, the book proposal is difficult. It can be, 30 to 60 pages long. It's a long and tough thing to put together that publishers want to see. So you can try the route of looking to see if there are publishers who will accept an unsolicited manuscript, but many of them will only deal with an agent. And so that's how my agent said, hey, here's a list of people who are any publishers you want. And you always pick the biggest ones and say, I want my book there. And then they know who they're dealing with and who they have relationships with. And so my agent sent the book or the manuscript around to, and the book proposal around to a round of people, and came back and said, well, nobody's buying. They said things like, oh, we're not doing civil rights right now. If they could have only looked ahead a few months, they would have seen the racial reckoning and understood that they needed my book. But anyway, so then there was a second round. She's like, okay, I've got another round of people I'm going to submit it to. And after about the second round, I said, well, when they came back negative, I said, well, why don't I, maybe I really should just self-publish. Maybe I should just self-publish. And she said, no, we are going to find you a publisher. And she approached somebody where I think she knew the publisher personally. And they looked at it and they loved it immediately. And so that was really great. And also it is also available as an audiobook, which I narrate. So that was kind of a fun experience because they couldn't find a production company during the pandemic. And so it was Audible, and they approached my agent and said, would she mind setting up an audio booth in her house? And they sent a packet, like it came in this like metal suitcase that looked like a bomb was in it. And it had all this stuff in there. And my husband set up, Bob set it up an audio booth in a walk-in closet and hung things on the wall so to absorb the sound. And it took over a week, actually. You know, those things are hard to do. A whole day of talking with a director, some actor out in California, and a technical guy in Baltimore. And at the end of the day, I was hoarse. And so we take a break for one day, and the next day you would do it again, and you sip hot tea, and it's really kind of grueling experience. But it was. But now I have an audiobook where I tell this story.
It's exciting. That sounds like a fun experience. I can't believe it's crazy the things the pandemic has affected to change. So there was one more question that came in that I do want to ask, and so we only have a couple minutes left, and so we'll maybe try and keep it brief. But someone did ask if either of you have had to deal with any negative public opinions towards any of your writings, and how you handled that without taking it personally, getting hurt, or letting it keep you from even writing again.
Nobody's gonna like everything you write. I'm just gonna say that. People, I don't want to say some of the questions. I'm writing from my heart. You don't have to like it. I had a reason for putting my story out there, and it was really to say thank you to a lot of people who have not been recognized for how important the Montgomery Bus Boycott was, because that was really the direct action protest movement that jump-started the civil rights movement. And for the people, there was somebody in one of my writing classes who said, "Why would you want to write another book about Rosa Parks?" Well, my book talks about Claudette Colvin, who was a teenage girl who was arrested for refusing to give up her seat 9 months before Rosa Parks, who a lot of people don't know about, and who should get a lot of recognition because her case was a separate case was a federal case that went to the Supreme Court, Browder v. Gale, that struck down segregated seating on the buses. And so it really wasn't the Rosa Parks case that ended segregation, and people don't know that. And so, when that girl in my writing class said, "Why would you write another book about who cares and who wants to know?" I mean, there are things like that, like, I don't care. I just have my story, and it's important for me to get it out there. And if they don't like it, I don't care.
It does. It seems like something when you're able to put yourself out there like that, you'd have to have some thick skin for. You got to be able to, that's great advice, I think. Recognize not everybody's going to like what you have to say. And so I think that's great. Well, I think we are out of time, right at 2 o'clock. I just want to say thank you so much, Karen and Shelley, for joining us. This was just wonderful. And thank you to our audience for joining. I just wanted to share that some of the resources that we talked about throughout this presentation that we're going to share in the follow-up email after this. And so if you're looking for links or information on the different books or Karen's books and Shelley's works, we're going to provide some of that afterwards. But again, thank you all so much for joining us. This was a ton of fun. Karen and Shelley, thank you again. Really appreciate you both a lot. And this has been great.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks to everybody out there as well.